What up, meatheads? It's Travis. In this episode, David and myself will be talking about BSE. And if you don't know what that is, stay tuned, listen. It's very important. It shaped our industry in crazy ways with export and rules and things of that nature. Also, I'll be back at the end for some lighter notes. And always remember,
parental discretion's advised.
The problem that we are facing is the bubble has burst here. Now, it could burst anywhere. There are any of the developed countries where agriculture is under the same pressure to produce food as cheaply as we possibly can.
The issue is no longer a question of the safety of British beef. The best available evidence demonstrates that British beef and beef products can be safely eaten by consumers both here and around the world.
If they knew as long ago as the end of the 80s enough to bring in legislation, why the hell even 10 years before that, when they must actually have had quite a lot of scientific evidence, they didn't do something about it? It is hard to see, and I think that's why people are so hysterical.
The Agriculture Minister, John Gummer, today enrolled his daughter Cordelia in his campaign to persuade people that eating beef is safe. It was a little hot for her. But later he munched it himself to prove to the world that he at least is confident there's nothing to worry about.
When you've got the clear support of the scientists who deal with these matters, the clear support of the Department of Health, the clear action of the government, there is no need for people to be worried, and I can say perfectly honestly that I shall go on eating beef as my children will go on eating beef because there is no need to be worried. Now, you can't do anything more than that.
In another effort to calm people's fears, Mr. Gummer's ministry will next week publish a pamphlet outlining what is known about BSE and answering some of the key questions.
Chronic wasting disease, scrapie, mad cow, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Alzheimer's, and Kuru. These are all diseases that are caused by or interact with misshapen proteins called prions. When these prions come into contact with other healthy proteins, they turn the healthy ones into more diseased prions. And when this interaction takes place in the brain, a domino effect happens, and in a relatively short amount of time, the brain ceases to perform the basic tasks. The individual is unable to complete thoughts, and eventually, the mutated proteins replace enough of your gray matter that you just stop functioning and die.
That sucks.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. In his way, the meat cutter is an artist. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
Today, we're going to be talking about bovine spongiform encephalitis, or mad cow disease, and how it affects us as butchers and the customers. And the threats, what are the actions we have to do to ensure food safety? Is it an issue? And how did we come to cow madness disease, as I call it?
What a pain in the ass.
Yes, it is. Well, we'll talk about how cutting corners, kind of fucked over the whole industry.
Yeah, it really did.
How you can't get a good grass-fed T-bone because of this.
Nope. The first case of BSE, or bovine spongiform encephalitis, was diagnosed in the late 1980s.
So I could have just said BSE.
Yeah, you want to do it? Let's
no,
do it.
I'm joking. I've referred to it as BSE my entire career.
Okay. Well, the first case of BSE was diagnosed in the late 1980s. Prion-based diseases have been acknowledged for at least 60 years at that point. Circa 1920, two German doctors, Hans Gerhard Creutzfeldt and Alphonse Maria Jacob, each individually identified the symptoms of spongiform encephalopathy in humans. Hence, the pathology was named Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, in their honor. The patients that the doctor studied, however, did not develop their diseases as a result of eating tainted beef. Rather, these patients spontaneously developed the condition as a rare type of natural mutation or genetic anomaly.
Later in the 1950s, some Australian explorers were in New Guinea when they discovered a previously unknown tribe. It was speculated that they were cannibals, and it was later confirmed, and some of the older members of the tribe were shaking, and they had these symptoms of shaking, losing motor functions, and then they would eventually die. And it was later discovered the reasoning for this condition was from eating, from being cannibals and eating the brain of deceased people. And that is kind of the same thing that happens with mad cow disease.
So somewhere down the line, there was just this natural mutation of prions in a person. They just happened to be, in this tribe of people, they just happened to be cannibals. And then they ate this guy or gal. And somebody ate their brain, and then it just kind of passed on from there. Yeah.
So it's the consumption of the prion the consumption of the protein would mutate and make the prion.
Okay.
It takes a while for this to happen. It's not immediate. So we're not so people would keep on doing it, and these were symptoms that this tribe would just see in their elders, and then it was later discovered that was happening. And this was in the 1950s, and no one really thought about it again until we kind of started seeing the same thing in cattle that eventually jumped to people. Now, eating I think it's like a natural evolution thing that, that if you eat the brain of your same species, that evolution's like, no, you shouldn't do that. But then
yeah, I guess so.
But there's no such thing as mad fish disease. Maybe there is. We just can't tell.
That's very true. Yeah. Why is it just in
mammal? I don't know.
Lactating mammals. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there's no mad bird disease. Anyway.
I remember one of the very first things I learned on the kill truck was, because at that point I had only slaughtered hogs and lamb, and we were dealing with the final rail or the final trim. I remember you telling me that prions could live on the surface of the sun. And, I think the point was that, your normal dip of your knife and normal cleansing through 180 degree plus water was not going to kill the prion. It was not going to get rid of it. It was all about detail and getting them out, and so talking about these cannibals, they cooked these tissues, they cooked the brain over the fire, but this still took place because heat does not sanitize from prions.
Yeah.
The way it does with other diseases.
I won't talk about that in what we do to prevent this from occurring.
Yeah. Let's come back to that.
And yeah, I have very strong opinions about it.
So let's see. Let's talk about cows, though. The first case of BSE in cattle was documented in the UK in the 1980s. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. government started to impose really strict import restrictions on the UK beef. And then around 1990, the U.S. Department of Agriculture established a new rule that all cows exhibiting central, nervous system issues, shaking, tremors, motor function impairs, whatever it may be, had to be taken out of the food supply, could not be slaughtered. And if they were, they had to go straight to rendering or otherwise, aligned landfill, I think is the actual rule. Yeah. In addition, to be ready for BSE in U.S. cattle, they required that a random fraction of all downer cows, or non-ambulatory, or cows that can't get up and walk around, they can't walk through the chute on their own, had to be tested for BSE. It wasn't until 2004, however, that the USDA finally banned all downer cows from our food supply. So, if you cannot process under USDA inspection downer cows, and that's why the pre-op inspection happens.
Yes, the anti-mortem inspection.
The anti-mortem inspection.
Yeah, where the USDA goes around and checks to make sure that while the animal's alive, that it is wholesome, it is able to move on its own. Before 2004, the rule was if it could fog up a mirror, you could process it. That if you held a mirror underneath its nose and the animal was breathing, then you could slaughter it and put it in the food chain. That all changed. Probably it should have changed, but a bunch of videos were released of people moving cows with forklifts and dragging them essentially terribly. There won't be a link in the show notes for that, just because it doesn't really paint a good picture. But that all that happened in down in California. It was a coal plant that was doing that, and I actually knew the inspector who was there at the time.
Really?
Yeah. And it's just that was the way it was done back then. And then it took those images to change that, which is, good for animal welfare.
No, it is, absolutely. And I mean, I still see plenty of sick animals come through. But as long as they can walk to where they're going,
yeah,
it's still okay.
The number one way they used to check downer cows for wholesomeness was by temperature. If they had a fever, they would not be put into the human food chain. And if their body temperature was sloping, it means that they were already dying. So BSE was introduced into the human food supply through bad feeding methods, where a lot of the animal byproduct that is accumulated through the slaughter process is made into like fish meal, or made into like this cake that you use for fertilizer. And some of that meal ended up getting put into cattle feed, and the brain material and other parts were a part of that being fed to cattle, starting that protein to mutate into the prion. And here's a news clip.
Richard Shepard and Soul Food's King of Kings. Fish and chips doesn't have quite the same effect. Now I would like to bring you up to date on a couple of stories from the last series. First, BSE. We questioned a year ago why animal offal was still being fed to pigs and chickens when it had been implicated in causing BSE in cattle. Well, this September, certain specified offals were finally banned from all animal feed after government scientists had succeeded in transferring BSE to a pig. But you remember that in a food and drink poll, viewers voted that they didn't wish any animal remains to be fed to animals that would not normally eat meat, by a huge margin. In fact, it's only certain offal that's now been banned. Animal protein is still processed for feeds. Despite widespread concern about what else can be done with the animal remains, this is a practice that many food and drink viewers are clearly opposed to. Organic farmers and a few other traditionalists do not employ this practice. We'll be reporting to you during the series on who they are and whether their numbers are growing. Julie.
Now, from time of consumption is 30 months. So that's why if you work in the industry, it's plus 30, minus 30. And that's assuming that the first day the animal is born, if it were to ingest these tainted materials from another animal, that's how long it would be before it could, the incubation period for humans. So feeding...
And those prions still incubate whether the animal's alive or dead.
Yeah.
Right?
So where you're going to find those in, let's just say, cattle under 30, is the brain, the spinal cord, which is this like white rubbery tendon looking thing running through the vertebral column. I believe the eyes, the distal ileum, and the tonsils of all beef. Now, if it's plus 30 and it is occurring naturally or it has time to form, you have to remove the whole vertebral column. That's why you don't get bone-ins, New York's or porterhouses. So all the feather bones have to be removed, and it's found, and the whole head has to be discarded at that point. The skull and everything. You're allowed to harvest the cheek meat, though.
You can have the cheeks. And you could have the tongue, obviously before the palatine tonsils, but that's it, right?
Yeah. And for disposal of, this stuff, it can't, like David said, it can't go in the landfill. But so these materials, regardless of the beef's age, it could have been a young beef or whatever, get introduced into the food supply, into the beef's food supply, then introduced into our food supply. So an animal is infected, it is slaughtered, is processed. You have your ground beef that has that, these little parts in it, like a little piece from the little piece of spinal cord or something, and it gets turned into hamburger, and you go home and you cook it, or you cook that porterhouse, and it has that SRM still in the bone inside of it, and you're going to be infected.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense why they were grinding up cows in the first place.
Yeah,
into feed. I mean, I'm constantly thinking about how much protein is in my ruminants' feed, trying to put fat on it. Makes sense.
Yeah. And that's one of the big ways how Dario over in Italy became famous, because during the mad cow disease big scare, he came out with a book called The Death of the Florentine.
Oh.
Which is a porterhouse. I don't know if it was a book or an article. Someone will correct me. I guess he just wrote Death of the Florentine. That'll be good. And so this started happening. There's no cure for it if you're infected. And it really hit Europe, the UK especially.
So when that happened in the UK, they realized that when a human is exposed to the prions that cause BSE, they contract essentially the same disease that the cannibals of New Guinea were suffering from, the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The USDA has implemented a bunch of steps in the slaughter and processing method that are supposed to reduce or eliminate the risk of prion exposure to the consumer. Anybody that's out there that's done slaughter knows, some steps that seem a little out of the norm, or like you kind of go out of your way to do a couple things. And what are these things, Travis? What are these extra steps that you can't forget?
Yeah, so if you're working with a beef, you have to remove the spinal cord and blow out the brain of the skull, usually using water to blow the brain out through the atlas joint. And then you collect the brain and the spinal cord, and you put them in trash that won't go out to rendering. Remove the eyes of the carcass. You're going to take this, and it's going to go into landfill, because you don't want it to go into like a soil enrichment program where, in theory, if this animal has the prion, it could live on the surface, grow on the grass, and then another beef can eat it. A lot of places don't practice that. They will just, do on-site compost or be careless with this step, which I've seen.
Well, I've seen that firsthand as well, and probably in the same place.
Yeah. And then you sanitize. So if you process animals that are over 30 months at the end of the day, and animals that are younger at the beginning, because 30 months of age is where it is more likely to occur if it were to occur. That being said, say you split a beef on one that's over 30, you cut through that spinal cord, and if that animal has mad cow disease, it spreads all over your saw, all over the carcass, and then go on to your next beef.
All over you, let's be honest.
Yeah, let's go to your next beef that may not have it, and you just contaminated that because, so the processing doesn't really make sense to me. You're cutting through it, and then potentially contaminating more carcasses. And what you're doing to, people will be like, well, you should wash your saw down in between. The protein could live on the surface of the sun, and that was told to me by a frontline supervisor who retired that was then doing consulting. And he said the whole measures for what we do is bullshit. The disease doesn't exist anymore in the Western world. And yeah.
I think we should introduce this section as the dog and pony show that is BSE protection measures.
Yeah, you're essentially it's like a lot of things that almost every USDA inspector I've worked with recognizes that this is not an issue. That feed practices have changed this. But it has to do what I've said in previous episodes about export. Certain countries need to have this standard of practice for us to export our meat to them, largely driven by Asian countries. This disease almost completely shut down the Canadian milk industry and coal industry in the late 90s because of exporting restrictions. At that point, they were just giving away coal cows. So these measures were made to please people when if the animal has it, the likelihood of it still being passed through the food chain is still very likely, even with these measures put in place.
Yeah, it's very confusing to me because, the first time you blow the brain out of a cow or a cattle, whatever, with a hose, those prions are going to atomize. They're all over you.
Yeah. You're not wearing a dust mask. You're not wearing it. You're just like.
I had a guy tell me the first time I had to go to the hospital for cutting myself bad enough that I couldn't stay at work. I had this doctor tell me, "Yeah, man, you're a butcher. Yeah, I was in med school and we were cutting into a cadaver, and one of the students was the one that was sawing open the cranium in order to get to the brain, and she ended up dying like 5 years later of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease because she was the one holding the saw. She was the one with her face close to it and was super curious. And we picked up some indigent person on the street. That was the cadaver that was donated, and they died of BSE. And then she got it, and that was it. So every time I go through and I'm taking a head off a hanging beef, and I cut that spinal cord, and all those muscles how when you tickle the spine with your knife, everything contracts, it thrashes a little bit. All that's thrown directly into my face. I can't tell you how many times my face is covered in blood and spinal fluid from cutting a head off from the backside. You know what I mean? It all has to do with, I guess, the antemortem inspection and the way that it was fed beforehand, because really nothing on the kill floor is actually going to protect anybody. I don't think.
Well, it's also sensationalism that it's something I am absolutely not worried about.
Not at all. I'm not worried at all.
I'll eat, cow brain and still feel confident that I will be safe. considering that, there's the last case found in America was found from a naturally occurring source, an animal being marked for slaughter, and they did a random test. And that was like the first case in 10 years, and that was 5 years ago. So to think about how many millions of beef we slaughter in this country, we had one naturally occurring mutation in so many billions.
It's true. So I guess, trust in the system. The system was set up to keep us safe, and it works.
Yeah. The feed system's set up to keep us safe. The measures now that we take for the USDA, I feel, are just, I don't think they're designed to screw over farmers, but, it certainly doesn't benefit people trying to raise grass-fed beef, where it takes a longer time to get the preferred weight you want for a quality animal. But you can't sell T-bones and porterhouses or Chinon ribeyes and things like that. I think that nothing's going to change. That I don't think they'll ever scale back the restrictions, because I think it, one, benefits the grain-fed industry.
Absolutely.
And
the lobbyists there have a very loud voice.
Yeah. But as far as it's something to be concerned with, no. Any farmers listening, don't feed dead cows to other cows.
Don't feed dead sheep to cows.
Yeah.
Because sheep get scrapey, and scrapey's the same damn thing.
Yeah. And anything else you want to say on this topic, David?
Don't eat spinal cord. Don't eat brain. It's gross.
Yeah.
But you're probably not going to get sick if you do.
Yeah. As a consumer, I feel you don't have... As a consumer, it's something that's not going to affect you. Now, that being said, if it has affected you or someone you know in the past, then we're sorry, but the measures now are in place as far as the feed. My brother had a coworker who had mad cow disease, and my brother didn't believe.
What?
Yeah, like because she was traveling in Europe during when it came about, and my brother didn't really believe her, and then she's dead now. So,
are you shitting me?
No, that's true.
Yeah, but how'd she get it though? She was eating beef?
Yeah, she was one of those 183,000 people affected in Europe or in the UK.
Is that how many it was?
Yeah, I have the numbers in front of me.
183,000 people got BSE?
Yes.
Holy shit.
188,000 worldwide.
Man, that doctor that told me that story about the med student with the cadaver told me that he's, in all of his years, he's seen a lot of ways to die.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he's never seen a worse way to die than the way she died.
Yeah.
So there's that.
On a lighter note, here's some outro.
I think next week we're talking about hot dogs.
Or this week we are. I don't know yet. We don't record in order. All right, I'm going to stop recording, David.
This is the last cowboy song, the end of 100-year wars. The voice
that was mad cow disease. Pretty crazy topic. A lot of things to discuss there. I'm sure we left stuff out. And if you have any insight, or if you are living in the UK during that time, and if you want to let us know how it affected you over there, we'd love to hear from you. And you could contact us on Instagram at themeatblock, Twitter at themeatblockpod, or email us Gmail themeatblockpodcast. And if you want to support the show, the best way to do that right now is just by telling a friend or going to iTunes and subscribing, reviewing, and leaving a comment. I want to thank real quick Joe Cesar and David V. High Voice for their lovely comments on iTunes. I also want to just say Short Loin wrote a lovely thing. Hey guys, finally got around to listening to your podcast up to episode 6. Listen to Knocking. Thanks for sharing. I'll try to spread the word. Retail Horror Nightmares had me rolling. I work in a place that does custom retail and smoking. Been at it for 13 years. Love to see your photos. Very informative and inspirational. Keep up the good work. And yeah, that's awesome. We love all feedback, and Instagram is a great place to let us know. If you haven't and you want to follow our account, we post things that relate to the episodes, and we post a bunch of stuff that don't relate to the episodes as well. Also, at Larry333, love the podcast, submitted a rating and review. Great music selection. Your production sounds good. Content might benefit from interviews. Sharing your background, maybe do recording intro that establishes a theme, I guess. We're working on that. This is only episode 9. We are developing this. David and I are butchers. First, we don't have technical backgrounds in sound engineering or anything like that, and we're just trying to figure this out as we go, and hopefully it organically evolves into something that people will enjoy. But thank you so much for the feedback. Glad you liked the music choice. This is a song called The Last Cowboy. And remember, keep your knife sharp and live in the margin.
This is the last cowboy song, the end of 100-year wars. The voices sound sad as they're singing along. Another piece of America's lost. This is the last cowboy song.